July 15th, 1975. There were two floating capsules in space, each from a different part of the world. One with a crimson flag representing the East and the ideals of communism, and the other flying the stars and stripes representing the West and democracy. These two capsules would slowly come intact and connect. No, this wasn't an act of aggression or some form of race. This was cooperation. The men inside the capsules would meet in the middle, not to fight or yell at each other, but solely to work together. The first action of these men was not to greet each other by gunpoint. No, the first action these men took was a handshake. This handshake will represent the change of the future of these two factions, a future for new amends, new technologies, and a better world. This handshake would be known as a handshake in space, and this event known as the Soyuz project. Post-World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union sparked a rivalry that would eventually start the Cold War. During the Cold War, July 15, 1975, the Apollo-Soyuz project would launch as the first collaborative project between the Soviet Union and the United States after World War II. The Apollo-Soyuz project was able to create revolutionary technological innovations, broke political barriers by sparking the beginnings of an alliance between the Soviet Union and the United States, and inspired new collaborative projects like the International Space Station. 1945. Post-World War II. The balance in world powers were shifting into new hands, most specifically focusing on the USSR and the United States of America. Both wanting to prove their form of government was the superior one. It was communism versus capitalism. This would form into the Cold War from 1947 to 1991, where both countries would try to expand their influence and one-up each other. When the USSR launched the first satellite into space in October 1957, this challenged the United States in the development of space technology. The United States responded by forming NASA and evolving its own space technology. This formed a rivalry in space exploration between the Soviet Union and the United States from 1957 to 1975. The sequence of events would be known as the space race, with many major events including Sputnik, Apollo 11, and the Apollo-Soyuz test project. The Apollo-Soyuz mission created revolutionary breakthroughs. This collaborative project created by the Americans and the Soviets was the first of its kind, leading the way to future technological wonders such as the International Space Station. The Apollo-Soyuz project mixed the technology of both the Americans and the Russians, the Americans introducing ideas like space shuttles, and the Russians leading much of the groundwork to the actual models themselves. Everyone I have spoken with about working with the Russians in space exploration believes that the United States has learned a great deal from Russia, and that Russia has learned a great deal from the United States, and the entire international space partnership is much better because of it. The Apollo-Soyuz project's main achievement was making revolutionary docking equipment that would connect two floating spacecrafts in space, something which was almost impossible before. This was developed by both the USSR and the US jointly. These docking stations are used today in many things. For example, the Apollo-Soyuz mission laid the groundwork for the docking mechanism and the International Space Station. The first docking of spacecraft built by different nations and pre-age the era of cooperation between the Russians and the Americans that is now such an essential part of our efforts to build a permanently occupied space station. Many advancements in technology created during the Apollo-Soyuz mission, and even the space race as a whole, allowed the creation of many everyday tools and utilities that we take for granted for today, such as an artificial limbs or Bluetooth, or even things such as memory foam. Because of the Apollo-Soyuz mission, we now have these things that are such as simple as memory foam to things that most people would even be able to dream of, such as linking two different spaceships in space. However, this wasn't the only dream that was achieved by the Apollo-Soyuz project. What started off as the Apollo-Soyuz mission broke political barriers between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. Apollo-Soyuz being the first collaborative test project between the US and the Soviet Union led to a safer world between these two countries. This idea was proposed by Richard Nixon to reach a détente between the hostile nations. It was accepted by Brezhnev, the Soviet premier and leader at the time. The Soviet and American spacemen will go up in outer space for the first major joint scientific experiment in the history of mankind. They know that from outer space our planet looks even more beautiful. It is big enough for us to live peacefully on it, but it's too small to be threatened by nuclear war. After decades of isolation between the Soviets and the Americans, where propaganda was used as a driving force of hatred between them, they were suddenly thrown together in a metal box in space. This mutual illusion of thinking the other and his countries were monsters was broken after actual interaction between them.
The relations were not very good between our countries, but that project made us work together.
We very quickly broke through that, because when you deal with people that are in the same line of work as you are, and you're around them for a short time, well, you discover that, well, they're human beings. After the successful Apollo-Soyuz mission, advancements were made in political relations between the US and the Soviet Union. Tension between the two countries were finally cooling down, after events like the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Vietnam War, where people were fearing that they can be blown up into nothingness at any second, and the rise of communism in yet another country. Projects like the Apollo-Soyuz mission helped two very different nations with very different ideals come together to make something beautiful that helps the world. No longer were these two nations competing against each other, but were now working together. The Apollo-Soyuz program was a representation for change in political relationships and the fate of the Cold War. In fact, the mission didn't just represent political change between those two nations, but the world, and the fall of the political barriers which separates the East and the West. The Apollo-Soyuz mission inspired the International Space Station, which broke even more political barriers and technological barriers. About 25 years after the Apollo-Soyuz mission, the International Space Station was created as a collaborative project between the US and Russia, as a build upon the Apollo-Soyuz project. In 1984, United States President Ronald Reagan issued the order to have the ISS built by 1994, and was accepted by the new leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev.
Tonight, I am directing NASA to develop a permanently manned space station and to do it within a decade. To participate so we can strengthen peace, build prosperity, and expand freedom for all who share our goals.
The Soviet Union created their own space station from 1995 to 1998. The Shuttle Mir program was created where NASA astronauts collaborated with Russian cosmonauts to answer vital questions about how humans, animals, and plants function in space, how our solar system originated and developed, how we can build better technology in space, and how we can build future space stations. However, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. But the Russian space agency Roscosmos sent their first section of the International Space Station into space in 1998 as the Democratic Russian Federation. The United States would send their contributions in December of that year as well. In 2008, the international influence of the ISS would grow and would start to include other countries like France, the UK, Japan, and more. The European and Japanese national labs would join the project and send their own sections into space. Over 15 countries today have contributed to the ISS by sending equipment, actual parts of the space station, or even just researchers to it. Currently, scientists of all ethnicities on the ISS are committed to discovering ways to make life better with the most recent technological developments giving us food grown in space, printing human organs in space, and researching the uses of microplasma. Ideally, the ISS program will just be one more incremental step on an expanding, incredible journey of exploration and understanding, taking us higher and farther. It shows that a relatively isolated project like the Apollo-Soyuz project can have a rather big impact, not just at the time but in the future as well. The ISS serves as an example of what is possible when countries break their political barriers and what can be possible when we work together as humanity. After projects like the Apollo-Soyuz project, one may argue that the Soviet Union and the United States were always too aggressive towards each other. With events like the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the Vietnam War from 1955 to 1975, in the Afghanistan War lasting from 1978 to 1992. Many events throughout the Cold War dignified relations between the Soviet Union and the United States, where the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was signed in 1963 and the Strategic Arms Limitation talks taking place during 1969 to 1979 to limit the effects of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Another major turning point towards the end of the Cold War would be the Reykjavik meeting between the Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev and the United States President Ronald Reagan, where they discussed the disposal of all nuclear weapons. This did not happen, however, but Gorbachev decided as the results of Reykjavik, as they were viewed by the Soviet leadership, encouraged all who want a turn for the better. Mikhail Gorbachev. Most importantly, the fall of the Soviet Union led to the modern-day collaboration between the United States and the Russian Federation. After the fall of communism in Russia, the Russian government was able to end the Cold War and become an ally to the U.S. The Apollo-Soyuz mission, along with the Strategic Arms Limitation talks and the fall of the Soviets, were able to bring Russia and the United States closer together as nations, where they'd be able to send men and women together in the dark depths of space since 1975 with the Apollo-Soyuz mission to now with the International Space Station. The Apollo-Soyuz project suggested changes for the future in both overall technology and political tension in the world. The Apollo-Soyuz mission created technological innovations, setting up groundwork for future projects and creating modern-day wonders. The Apollo-Soyuz mission would also set up the alliance we have today, since it was the first collaborative project between the Soviet Union and the United States, and would break the ice for years to come. The Apollo-Soyuz mission would even create international projects today, where its influence spanned out to the International Space Station. In the end, the Apollo-Soyuz mission influenced the breaking of the barrier of the final step to full industrialization, the thirst for the knowledge of the universe above, and the cold bitter hate between the two most influential nations of the world.